Well, I'm really happy to welcome Morag Gamble to help us with Reset Yourself. Morag is a global ambassador for permaculture. She has set up the Ethos Foundation, a charity which essentially is supporting people in Kenya, Uganda, and all around the world to learn and implement the tools of permaculture to support their sustainable and regenerative lifestyles. She also is the founder of the Permaculture Education Institute, which basically is educating people across 6 continents around the world. When someone purchases a program, she donates one place in the program as well. So working with people from as diverse places as Kashmir and again throughout Africa. And so really it's an evolving social enterprise that she's developed with the Permaculture Education Institute. And she is also helping with the Perma Youth project, which is essentially also a global project, working a lot again with refugees in camps. So she's working with the Ethos Foundation with refugees, helping them to implement some of those concepts, and also the kids are working with kids in refugee camps, and again all around the world, giving them some skills for practivism, which is practical activism. So I'm so grateful for Morag to join us, and I think that someone of her caliber, if you get a chance to see anything that she does, just check her out, because she's really just donating and giving gems for us to really refresh ourselves and to reset. So Morag, thanks again. And can you give us an idea, for anyone who doesn't actually know what permaculture is, what's your definition, or how could you describe what permaculture is?
Hi, thanks for having me. It's really great to be here with you, Sally. So permaculture, my simple description of what permaculture is about designing for one planet living. And that extends to all different aspects of our life, because I really see that at the heart of it, permaculture it's a mindset, it's a way of thinking, and being in the world based on some core ethics around caring for the earth, caring for people, and fair share, which, the permaculture 3 ethics, we call them earth care, people care, fair share. And so often people understand permaculture as applied to the garden, which is where you see it manifested most, and it's most visible there. But once you start to play in the garden in that way, it kind of ripples into all different aspects of your life. You start to think differently about, how you're accessing your food, and how you process it in your home, and how you deal with waste, and how then you're watering it, and how the impact of your life on the water system, and then how so it starts to ripple out, because everything is connected to everything else. And so once you start to pull up one thread, you start to see that web of relationships. And so it's about being in the world in those relationships fully, and about being present to help regenerate the planet. And one of the key motivating forces, I think, about permaculture is about creating healthy human habitats. It's about creating spaces that are healthy for us, for other peoples, but also for other species, and to regenerate the planet, because actually regenerating the planet is regenerating our home. And kind of the key motivating force in that way is then saying, okay, well, in order to help regenerate the planet, we need to reduce our footprint. How do we reduce our footprint? We think about what is one planet living. And that's where permaculture comes in, with all its different principles and strategies and ideas. But like I said at the start, simply said, it's really about a way of thinking and being in relationship with the planet, with our local ecosystems, and with our communities in a way that is regenerative.
Great. And I love that concept of one planet living, because we do have such an incredible, we know that we're using up however many planets every year in resources, and we're taking away from the future generations because of that. So I absolutely love that concept. And so the founders, Bill Mollison and David Holmgren, is that right?
Holmgren. Yeah.
And you studied
Holmgren, Holmgren, Holmgren. Yeah, so Bill passed away a few years back, but David Holmgren still lives in Hepburn, and is recently written a book called Suburbia, which really explores how we can apply the principles of permaculture into changing the way we live in and around our cities and suburbs. Because the reality is that, you know, most of Australia lives in an urban environment. And how do we do it? It's not, you know, permaculture is not all about going out to the countryside and homesteading, although it does manifest itself in that way too. It's about, well, how can we, you know, maybe open up our fences or our relationships and think about what Rosemary Morrow, another sort of early adopter of permaculture, talks about: dispersed permaculture. So, for example, if you're living in an urban environment, you might be able to grow a couple of fruit trees. Your neighbour might also be able to grow a couple of fruit trees or have a surplus of something. So you think about that dispersed nature. And so again, what that does is it builds relationships, because instead of seeing ourselves as atomized beings or household units in our little borders, it takes away that construct of these borders as being the limits of our interaction, and see our relationship with that place and with our community in a broader sense. And so this is where it gets really exciting, I think, the permaculture world, is when you start to get those connections happening between people. I mean, I live in an eco-village here in southeast Queensland called Crystal Waters. It's a permaculture village. It was designed and established with the idea of it having permaculture principles embedded in it. But it's not just about Crystal Waters itself. It's about how Crystal Waters relates to the bioregion, how Crystal Waters is informed by local Indigenous cultures. It's about how Crystal Waters is informed by its relationship to the local economy and involved in helping to set up cooperatives. Like there's a local community bank, there's a local community food cooperative, there's a local community artist collective. You know, when I'm getting my milk, for example, I pop down, we have a collective dairy here. So once a week, it's my turn to go and milk. And then someone else cares for the cows. So the cows get lots of love. And it's done in an ethical way. And then we collect the manure, and the manure comes back to our compost systems, and we make cheeses, and then we hand those around, and the yogurts, and someone's got their yogurt's working better than my yogurt. And so we'll share their, you know, culture. And it's about that collective communication. It's not about living in each other's pockets and being, you know, stuck together like that, but there's threads of connection that are really rich. And what I feel that's important about that, particularly in these times that we're in now, is that there's this real sense of security in community.
Yeah. That
we're not alone, that if we get stuck, we know who our neighbours are, and we know who we can reach out to, and that, you know, there's food in the gardens. It may be different from the food you might get in the shops necessarily, but there's food, you know, like there's something that you can eat all the time. And actually, one of the things that I really encourage people to do with their food systems, whether you live in a small backyard or in a larger property, is to think differently about the plants. You know, I actually often say to people that I guarantee that you can grow 10 times as much food that you think, simply by changing the way that you perceive the plant that's in your garden. Say, for example, pumpkin. You know, a simple example I use is pumpkin. So, you know, all you need to grow a pumpkin is a pumpkin. So, you know, if we think about how we like to nourish our own bodies with whole foods, and we think about, well, what is the purpose of a pumpkin? The purpose of a pumpkin is not to feed you. The purpose of the pumpkin is to nourish the seeds inside. And so that's the whole food for the seeds. So if you want to grow a really healthy pumpkin, just take a slice of the pumpkin with some of the seeds in it and put that in the ground. And as it decomposes, it has all the right enzymes and nutrients which create the conditions for that pumpkin to flourish. And so it kind of composts and makes it all, you know, nutrient dense food for the seeds. And so the seeds will then flourish, and particularly in a nice compost, you know, you see pumpkins drifting off all over the place. Now, the problem with the pumpkin in the middle of an urban area is it's kind of likes to spread.
They take over.
But that actually is the brilliance of it, because what it's doing is each time those little tendrils head off, you know, I just kind of go around and I snip off the ones that are going in the direction I don't want them across a path, and that's dinner. Pumpkin leaves and pumpkin shoots are a brilliant spinach. So we try and grow like spinach over there and the pumpkins over there, and complain the fact that the pumpkin's taking over the garden, whereas the pumpkin's providing an abundance. You can get the big leaves and you can steam them up for a minute and turn them into like a gluten-free wrap. So why go and buy, you know, like an expensive wrap that's wrapped in plastic and baked on the other side of the city, where, you know, in the back garden, there it is waiting for you just to go and harvest it. And the bits that are also covering the ground are like a living compost, and if you look down underneath, there'll be life happening, frog homes, lizard homes. It's composting back into the soil and nourishing the soil life, and the worms are going, yoo-hoo, this is great. and then you get the pumpkin, and, you know, and we haven't even got to the pumpkin fruit yet. So that when you get to the pumpkin bit, I mean, even before you get to the pumpkin, the flower's edible, and I tend to just eat the male flowers because you want the female flowers to create new pumpkins. So you can tell that because at the base of the female flowers is like the little pregnant belly. On the male flowers, it's just a stalk. And so you can tell really easily which is the male and female. So you can eat the male ones and you can stuff them, you can have them in salad, you can stir fry them. So that's another kind of vegetable. So you've got the shoots, the leaves, the big leaves, the flowers, and then you get to the pumpkin. Now, sometimes there's so many pumpkins you don't know what to do, or the tendrils going off and there's little pumpkins and you think, oh my gosh, I don't really want to chop that off. But you can eat the pumpkin from the moment it started. If you think it's of the zucchini gourd family, and if you think of a zucchini, you're always eating it as an immature thing. So you can eat a pumpkin immature. The little ones are like little squashes. So you just slice them up and stir fry them. And when they you can eat them at any stage. You don't actually have to wait till it gets mature and orange. But you obviously want to wait for that as well. But then you can eat the skin and you can eat the seeds and even the young stalks if they're not too hard yet. But mostly they're usually, by the time you eat a pumpkin, they're pretty they go in the compost heap. But so what you can see is that every single piece of the pumpkin is edible. And then when we think about food waste, my dad used to be the most amazing, well, he still is an amazing pumpkin soup maker, but he would dutifully like take off all the skin and scoop out all the seeds and chop it up beautifully. And I went to a friend's house, it must have been a decade ago now, and there she was with like a kind of a machete type thing, just chopping up the whole pumpkin and tossing into the pot. And I said, oh, what you making? Pumpkin soup. I almost fell off my chair. All those years I'd been like taking off the edge of the pumpkin and, you know, that's where like so much of the phytonutrients are. It's all the greenness and, you know, inside that's this pumpkin seeds of protein. I mean, often people scoop out the pumpkin seeds, throw them away, and then go down the store and buy pepitas. It's the same thing, you know. And so it's about changing our perception to the foods that are available. And, you know, we grow broccolis and, you know, the broccoli leaves are totally edible. Or if you're growing a mustard spinach, for example, you know, the spicy, open-hearted leafy greens that you can just take an edge off. And this is also, I'll just divert for a minute. I mean, the idea of growing things that last a really long time instead of like plant and pull, they get a deeper root system and they start to create a relationship with the mycorrhizal fungi and they form a community of plants. But then these mustard spinaches, when they come up and they go up to seed, while the seed shoot is still flexible, you can eat that as like a spicy asparagus. And then as it gets up a little bit higher, it flowers and the flowers are edible. I mean, most vegetable flowers are edible. You know, that's another source of fantastic food and color and, you know, pollinator attracting, you know, benefits to the garden. So you can eat the flowers. And then when the flowers are finished, you get little pods, and then little pods are like spicy peas. And so you can just take them off the top and throw them into a salad or into a stir fry. And then when the little pods go brown and hard, you can crush them open, and inside there's little black seeds, which is you can save and plant next year. But you get so many. What I do is I just take the whole top of the plant off, pop it in an old bed sheet, and roll it up and get my kids to do a dance, and all the seeds come out and you get this great big bundle, and then you can make your own seeded mustard.
Wow.
And so from one plant, then self-seeds again next year, you have all of these things. And often when things go to seed, people start to say, okay, well, that's finished, I'll rip that out. Whereas it's just the beginning of, it's about thinking about not just space, but time and how we can interact with our garden across all those space and time continuums, and also think about different things that we can eat. And I'm constantly wandering around the garden, like plucking things off and having a nibble as I'm going around. And, the snow peas, everyone loves eating snow peas in the garden, but you can also eat snow pea flowers and snow pea shoots and leaves. And, it's questioning, all the time about things that are edible. And one last example of that is like the olive tree. I have this olive tree in the garden, and I'm in a subtropical environment. Olive trees are mostly Mediterranean, and it wasn't producing many olives. And, out of 15 years, I'd got like one jar of olives, I think. And so I was having a chat with the olive tree saying, I think we're going to have to part ways. I need this space for something else. So I went away and started thinking, well, hang on a tick. Olive leaf extract. Olive leaf extract is something that, I bought in the store before, and I never made that connection between my plant and the olive leaf extract. So I went, okay, I'm going to learn how to make it. And it seemed really kind of fussy. So I thought, there must be another way that I can use the olive leaves. So and then I realized, actually, you can just make a simple tea from it. So you just grab the fresh olive leaves, pop it in a teapot, and it's more mild than olive leaf extract. But if you, sip a cup of tea over, throughout the day, it has those benefits of helping, to, keep you healthy and strong. And I kind of went, fantastic, welcome olive tree, you can stay.
Did it start producing more fruit for you then as well?
Oh, well, no, but the leaves are great.
Yeah, they are. And I know the flowers as well, of the olive flowers, there's in flower essence therapy, there's also an olive flower essence as well. So
okay, well, there's another.
Yeah.
I'm going to have to explore that one. That's fantastic. Thank you.
I'm so inspired by what you've just said as well, in terms of like how many parts of the plant at different phases of its growing cycle are edible. And what it made me think of was like, wow, the diversity of what you're eating for your microbiome and what we know about that now, or what's coming to the fore about how crucial that is for health, immune health, but overall health, and mental health as well, like keeping your your microbiome healthy and diverse is really crucial for that. So I loved what you were saying about like, the pumpkin and how many parts of it can be used. And I was thinking, gee, all of those plant chemicals coming into the system, feeding, all of these different aspects of our microbiota as well, which is just awesome. Yeah, awesome. So, I mean, we can see how permaculture can apply to the garden, and you've talked about these concepts. And I wonder, people who don't have enough space for, a wandering pumpkin plant, or, a really big, really big sort of cabbage or something, how else can people, how else can it be relevant to people who don't have that kind of land? I mean, you spoke a little bit about that in terms of the connection and the lack of isolation that you love, but could you give some other examples about how that could be incorporated into people who may be living in a city environment?
Yeah, great. I mean, this is where it gets really exciting. Like I said before, it's about, where you start to get the community connections happening. But I'll start at the home. So there's always somewhere, whether it be in your front porch, on your balcony, or even on a windowsill, somewhere where you can grow something. And I always encourage people to grow something, because there's that, like you're saying, something about the, the mental health, your connection with seasons comes from having that. Like the house plant craze is just enormous now. So why not make those edible house plants? Find a way to do that. There's so many things we can do. And, even if you've got, say, often you can grow citrus in a pot, for example. There's fruit trees you can grow in a pot, and you may not get that much fruit. But the thing about using the leaves, like I was just walking along a path the other day, and I came across this mandarin tree, and I just grabbed on the leaves and just smelt it. And then just that crushing the leaves and getting the scent of it. So whether there's herbs or some kind of plant, and you can use those citrus plants, it could be a kaffir lime, it could be something that you put into your cooking every day. There's some plant that you can have a relationship which connects you to the broader system that you are eating from every day in some way, or interacting with in some way. Then it connects you with the food system, and it starts to connect you with the cycles So thinking about, what am I doing with my food waste? And so if you don't have a place to have a compost at your place, maybe there's a community compost. Maybe you could join up to one of the share waste systems. Like there's apps now that you can connect with your neighbours, and someone else does have space, you can take it there. Or possibly there's a community garden somewhere that has a space for that. And I see that all across Brisbane, which is the closest city to me. So it's about thinking beyond our home, our unit, our apartment, our house, to think about how we can interact in our broader community. So it's also putting on a different kind of lens. So like thinking, all right, where can I possibly grow food or collaborate with others or think differently about my commons? And I we think about, I think it's Los Angeles, where half of the public space is road for cars. All of the roads, all of the parks, all of the verges, all of the public land are commons. This is the commons for people, for planet, for, how can we think about that differently? And so that could be about creating verge gardens, or it could be creating, community gardens, community food forests, community orchards. It could be a school garden. It could be a workplace garden. What other places do you have interaction with that you could possibly get involved with other people to create something? And I really love it too when it's something that it's not just about you and some, maybe just a small group, but it's actually about, it has a multiplier effect, that it's there and it's about helping to spark the imagination and to inspire others and to engage others and to, if you can choose to put it out in a public place. I remember, when I lived in Brisbane, I made a little veggie garden right on the front, and it was the best thing. Like often people said, oh, people steal your veggies. And I actually thought, well, great, if they come along, and what it did, people would come along and they'd taste these little cherry tomatoes and just go, oh, I remember, and the stories would start to flow and the relationship would start to build, and say, well, why don't you take some of those? And if you sprout that in your garden, you'll get some as well. And, so you build the relationships, you let people would take cuttings. And I was so happy about that, because that meant they were taking a cutting and sticking it somewhere in their garden. It's a good thing. I often I do workshops in and around Brisbane, and I just fill my car up with just as many cuttings as I can, lay them out on the table, then tell stories about all the different plants. And these sort of stories are stories that, as I've worked with permaculture around the world, I've learned about different ways of using plants. It's not something that you've read in the book. It's like, I was in a village in Africa and someone said something about this plant, or I was in another workshop and there was a woman from, Vietnam who said, oh, my grandmother used to do that. And it's this oral history about how we interact with plants. I mean, there's well over 30,000 different varieties of edible species, yet we rely on just three, for most of the food that we eat in our industrial modern food system. And it's no surprise that we're unhealthy. And so by surrounding ourselves in our gardens, in our homes, in our communities with a diversity of food, that we can just pick a leaf of this, a leaf of that, a leaf of that, or even, foraging. I love the urban foraging of, another spot where I was living in Brisbane had macadamias up and down the main street, and there would be a time of year where we do the macadamia harvesting. And there's another street I know that has tamarins, and so you go on a tamarind field day, and then another day it'd be, another season would be lily pilly season. And so once you start to think about being in your city or town or suburb or wherever you are in that way, with an observance about what are those food seasons and food cycles, and noticing what happens over time as well. Like if it's a wet season, there's going to be way more of a certain type of food, or if it's a dry season, and you start to feel the difference, and you start to then engage with people saying, oh, I've noticed that there's a whole area down there where the river is being polluted by runoff. And then you start to think, oh, what if we did a tree planting along there? And, you start to engage in different ways because you have a connection with it in a personal way. You start to engage with it in a collective way. And it's such an interesting way to be in a space. And the interaction that I've had and the connections that I've made and the depth of feeling about a place that I've had through being involved in community gardens is extraordinary. You know, often we think about a community garden as a place to grow food, but really it's about a place to grow community, and it's about a place to find who you are in that context.
Oh, awesome. I'm so loving what you're talking about. It's so amazing. And what I'm hearing is, this engagement that you can have is as simple as like taking a smell of a citrus scent, which then kind of connects in with your limbic system, or connects in with some kind of deeper sense of your humanity in a way, and then you're engaging with that, and you're relating with that in an emotional way, and as well as like with some sort of, I think it provides some sense of security and some sense of safety in a very unsafe time. It's a lot of fear going on. So even that engagement kind of brings that sense inside of you. And then if we take it a bit further into relating with other human beings, or and then there's that connection, which is also we're safer together and we're better together. But then also it's kind of connecting with the seasons, as you talked about, or connecting with your environment and starting to love it and caring for it and investing your loving attention into it, which then of course perpetuates more feeling of connection for you and also invites others to connect in with that as well. I love permaculture. It's awesome. I'm so appreciating how your passion around it, Morag, is it's just infectious and it's wonderful, but also just how easy it is for all of us to be part of it. Hey.
Yeah. I just wrote something the other day. I was doing a lot of work with a woman called Nora Bateson at the moment, who is extraordinary. She does she's talks about warm data, and it's really about bringing I won't explain it because it will take me off on a whole other tangent, but check out Nora Bateson and her warm data work. But I was in a session with her last night, and something came up, just popped into my brain, and I was thinking it's all about how the connections that we have and the warmth that we bring to things. And I was thinking permaculture is really a love letter to the earth. There was something about the way that she said something, and it just like popped into my brain, and it sounded a bit corny, but just in this thread of conversation, it kind of makes sense. It's a way that, through the love and the respect and the absolute depth of care and commitment that we have to the planet and to all life, that's why I do permaculture anyway. Yeah. Because I care, and people do care, but often they're not quite sure how to act in a different way, because we have such strong patterns that we're in. And what I'm seeing with where we're at the moment with the pandemic is that, we've been on this sort of rail and going along this way, and it's just kind of like shoved us off. And like we're exploring different ways, and like, how do we make sense of this world that we're in now? And how do we find a different type of security and a different type of meaning and a different type of work even? Yeah. And how do we reallocate the time that we have in either? How do we re-inhabit our work lives when we're more home-based? Or how do we rethink our food system when we don't have the same transportation system? And I'm thinking of this particularly in the context too of the refugees that we work with in Uganda and Kenya. And they're saying, well, half our rations have been cut by half. So the UNHCR delivers rations to these refugee camps, and mostly it's just GMO corn and GMO beans and a little bit of vegetable oil that's GMO canola oil. This is the food that they get, and they're in the middle of a desert. So of course their immune systems are going to be down, but what's happened is that rations have been cut in half. And the World Food Programme has said by the end of this year, there's going to be 265 million people who are on the brink of starvation. We're not hearing about this in the news. Wow. We're hearing this directly from people who are on the ground, and they're saying, it's absolutely disastrous what's going on. And so their connection now with permaculture is actually saying, well, we can access the local food waste. If we get some seeds and we get some basic skills, we can be growing our food in and around our huts and our homes. We can be creating community gardens. And they just sent me some photographs and some films of what they've been doing in some common spaces that they've been able to find. And it's extraordinary. And I've just received a song from these perma youth talking about how it's absolutely transforming their lives, because they had no hope. You know, these kids, there's this kid about 16-year-old, he got on the Zoom with the perma youth the other day, because they talk each week, which is brilliant, because the kids who are around the world are connecting with each other and experiencing, you know, hearing different people's experiences, but also with the perma youth. And they're saying this is the first time we've felt a sense of hope. You know, we're stuck here. We have no idea if we're ever going to get back. Some of them have been there for 13 years in this camp. They said, we have no idea if we ever go anywhere else. No one else wants us. We're here. We're stuck here. And this is the first thing that we've had that gives us a sense that not only can we be feeding ourselves in this way, but we can have interaction with other people who are actually interested in what's going on in our lives. And that, you know, we can see through this how we can start to create enterprises, and they're weaving in their art and their music, and they're doing theatre, and they're saying, okay, if we start to do plays around this, we'll be able to ripple this out further and faster. So it's like I'm learning so much from them every day, and then sharing that back in with the perma youth here. And, you know, it's extraordinary. They're, you know, and it's the connection is actually just exploding the sense of humanity and care that I'm seeing in the people who are involved in the perma youth and this local permaculture movement. It's you know, it's blowing my mind apart in terms of how I interact with the world and how I interact with permaculture, because, you know, it's so easy to be within your bubble of privilege.
Yes.
And think it's a really lovely thing to do.
Yeah.
But at the same time, being really conscious that 1 in 30 people in the world are heading towards the brink of starvation by the end of this year. You know, what do you do with that information?
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, it's great. And, you know, I think that whole thing of caring, you know, the word root for care and cure is the same. And I think that that's a really, really important thing to remember, because we are in this bubble of privilege. And how do we reach out to those, and how do we affect that? If we shift the way in which we think, then we then influence more and more change. And I do believe that we can do so much, which is kind of this whole reset yourself idea, is like, well, let's shift our way of thinking. And it sounds as well, like, it sounds amazing, the amount of the fertility of what you've just described with these refugee camps, and the youth really, you know, providing some sense of hope, like planting seeds of enterprise and of self-reliance and capacity and all of those things for these people who are refugees, so traumatized from being kicked out of their countries and then destitute in some ridiculous hellhole where they're getting fed, you know, food-like products. And you know, it's quite a profound state of the world, that's for sure. So I think I'm just so impressed by and so grateful to you for doing all of the work that you're doing. I wanted to share this little quote that I came across the other day from Bill Mollison, which I think is a classic. And the quote is, "Evil is stupidity rigorously applied." I love that. Don't you love that?
Oh, you know, and I think the thing is with this is it is about just connecting with what is real and what is making a difference. And how, like, so I was listening to something last night saying, well, how are you applying your good today? I thought, well, that's a really simple way to start. Like, if you wake up in the morning and say, how can I apply my good today?
Yeah.
Wow, you know, it shifts you. Like, how do you interact with everything that you encounter in your day from a perspective of it being about helping to, you know, make a positive difference, or be the change that matters, or being the difference that makes a difference. And something that I've come across lately too, in a shift of thinking, you know, I grew up with this thing about wanting to be, you know, like, be the change maker, you know, because we need to make change in the world. And coming to the realization now that, well, change is happening. We've got massive change that's happening now, and change will always happen. The question, therefore, really needs to be around, how can I create the conditions for the change that we need to happen in the world, which is a different question, and a different motivation too. And so shifting into that perspective of how we can help to be in the world in a way that cultivates those conditions for the difference that makes a difference.
Absolutely.
And it's a more peaceful and connected way that helps to cultivate a vitality, because still, if you're going into as a change maker, I'm going to change things, like you end up in this thing. And we need to kind of go more into the complexity. There's no kind of right or wrong or, evil or good in that way. There is this sort of sense of, and, I try also to avoid this sense of, like naming and shaming as well, because, it puts up barriers and blocks, and, it's almost I think the most powerful thing we can do is to, it's kind of corny that, be the change that you want to see in the world, which is creating the conditions, which is creating an invitation for other people to join. And if other people kind of see that it's working and it's bringing joy and vitality and health in your context and in your own way, then it has an appeal, doesn't it? And I think it's about showing, not telling. And we know that from all different, like whether you're a writer or whatever, it's always show, don't tell, and that is, I think that's the power of it. And one of the things that I'm seeing a lot now within the permaculture movement is that there's a lot, they're all over, it's a kind of an extraordinary thing that there's this mycelium web that connects. There's millions of people around the world who've done a permaculture course or been, interacted with permaculture, but it's not this really massive visible thing globally. It's there everywhere. And then if you think about a mycelium web, like the mushrooms are the fruiting bodies of this mycelium web. And so every now and then you see these projects, there might be like crystal waters, or there's series, or there's, all these different sorts of fruiting bodies that you see. And what I think we need to do now is to more sort of like shine a light on these different fruiting bodies, and to tell the stories of those, and tell the stories of people who are involved and interacting with it. And then that gives you a sense of what is this mycelium web. And it's so strong. And it's really, from a social perspective, it's the same thing as what we try and do in a garden.
Yeah.
That, if we have atomized trees where we sort of plant a tree here and then plant a tree here and have a little garden in a raised thing here that's separated from that bit, you don't get that community, whereas we know now, the science tells us now that actually it's what's going on underneath in the mycelium web, in the soil life, and creating a community. It connects the community, and they're all in this mutually supportive environment, and it shifts that understanding, helps us to shift the way that we see ourselves in relation to things, and it helps us to see the connections, whereas maybe before we thought, oh well, that's just a little project over there and it has no real impact on what's happening over there, or that's just an isolated incident of good over there. No, actually it's part of an amazing web of relationships that exist across the planet, and each of the things that happens that make that shine and flourish is also helping to make all of these other things shine and flourish, and for more fruiting bodies. And then the thing, if you think about that, when a mushroom comes up, what happens next? Like when it matures, like millions and billions of spores spread out, and so and then they land, and then they create more life and vitality. And so we need to shift our metaphors. We need to shift our thinking from a linear perspective of like 1 + 1 is 2 and 2 + it's not like that. It's not linear at all.
It's very abundant, actually, I think, and it's very prosperous. It's very much, obviously you have times of abundance and then times of, when it's winter and things are closed down. But the idea of that, what was it? The 3 key permaculture tenets that you said. One was fair share, and there were 2.
Earth care, people care, fair share. Yeah.
And
Earth care, people care, fair share. Yeah.
They're all beautiful concepts that I think everyone can, in their own way, provide. They can provide a little bit of direction for how they move forward in their own world. Would you like to say anything before we finish up? Because we've gone for a few minutes longer than I anticipated, but it's been so interesting to hear, and to sense your passion, and to also hear about how accomplished you are and your work is in the world. And thank you for all of that hard work as well, because it takes a lot to get things moving, and good on you. And hats off to you, because I think it's amazing what you're doing. But yeah, in terms of people moving forward, I think there's some, you know, they've got lots of people who are listening to this have got lots of ideas. Is there anything you want us to say to finish off with?
Oh, really just to start growing something and to look differently at the foods. Like as you walk through your neighborhood, start to feel and sense into and look at what are the possibilities. Put on the possibility glasses. There's unprecedented possibilities, and things have shifted and changed in the world. And, you know, everything is different. And so, you know, if we enter into this space and negotiate how we're in that space differently, you know, we may see different ways that we can grow things. We may see different opportunities for work. We may see different opportunities for cultivating community, and just to enter into that space with a smile in our mind about, you know, where we can help to bring that vitality out, and to ask, you know, like maybe try out those ethics and go, so with what I'm doing, how can I help to contribute to the caring of the planet? How could what I'm doing contribute more to the caring of people in my own space, in my neighborhood, or on the other side of the world? And how in what I'm doing can I be contributing to the fair share? And that could be about thinking about the impact, you know, diminishing our impact so that other species can flourish. It could be about thinking and how we can distribute, you know, the surpluses and abundances that we have in any way. You know, it's the question of what is enough. And, you know, the idea of living a one planet life doesn't mean about going without. It actually means just doing things differently, and doing things in a joyful sense of there is abundance. You know, it's like I was saying with the pumpkin plant. You know, if you take that pumpkin plant thinking and apply it to everything that you do, then you can see everything differently.
Yeah. Possibility glasses. I love it.
That's right. Possibility glasses.
Morag Gamble from the Permaculture Education Institute, the Ethos Foundation, and the Perma Youth Global program. Thank you so much for your time. It's been such a pleasure and an honour to have you here, and wish you all the best with your work and life further. Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Sally. Thanks for having me.